So we are standing on 11th Avenue, and here is sort of a shot of the park. So again, we have 15 Hudson Yards here, 10 Hudson Yards, 30 right behind this building. This front one here is 35 Hudson Yards, and then the one next to it here is 55 Hudson Yards. And right across the street, separating 11th Avenue and the West Side Highway, is the remaining portion of the Hudson Yards complex. And so this will get covered up. I will post proposals for the buildings here. So they did downscale them. Initially it was going to be a couple. Now it looks like there'll be 3. But what looks like might be happening here will be a casino. So the second casino in New York City, operated by Wynn Resorts. So I'm not entirely sure what the square footage of this is. I know the entire complex is around 13 acres, so this might consist of maybe a third that's left. And of course, this new phase will have the High Line surrounding. So prior, the High Line hasn't really touched the Hudson Yards. It usually went around it, but now this will really encompass it. So I am facing south here, and it looks like construction has begun. And so essentially, I'm pretty sure you all are aware of how this was constructed, but essentially they're gonna put some support columns in the middle of these tracks and then put large concrete surfaces to cover the top. And that is what we're standing on right now. Pretty sturdy, you know, cars are going by. I do feel it vibrate a little bit if it's a heavier vehicle. But the fact that this entire complex essentially standing on this yard, maybe not that building over there, but certainly 15 Hudson Yards has a portion of it on the complex, shows that it really will withstand whatever they build on it. But it looks like here we'll really get the full brunt of the load of the buildings, because from the looks of it, there's going to be buildings right here on the actual surface. Because if by the looks of it, most of the yard, I think, is just this open courtyard area where the vessel is. And so these buildings kind of went around that area. But I'd imagine here you'd have a full skyscraper on these concrete slabs from the models. But it looks like this area might, there's no trains, of course, to the left over here, so this might not need much structural support from the concrete slabs won't impact it as much. But whatever building they built in the center here, that's where it's going to be fully, essentially levitating on these concrete slabs, relying solely on the concrete sort of support columns in between. And one thing I noticed is, you know what? It technically does hit the Hudson Yards complex. You can see it actually goes under 10 Hudson Yards there. So that's pretty cool. So it looks like they closed off this High Line part. I don't know if that's always been closed, but it looks like it sort of, you could say, ends or begins at this point here. I don't know if that's always been the case, but actually it's not, because I've seen some Google images of that side there, but I guess they're renovating it. And here's a glimpse of what we're looking at here. And I'll give my final thoughts on the Hudson Yards in a little bit. And here's another shot of the yard. And you could see those support columns and how this entire thing is constructed here. You have these slabs of concrete. I guess there's some steel mixed in there. It's not purely concrete. and you have these support columns in the middle. And that's essentially what's keeping this thing up. And they built this all the while keeping the trains running. And of course, no trains pass through here. This is just a yard. But there are trains that pass underneath it. So you have trains passing underneath it, trains passing on the ground level, and nothing was disturbed. So here we are standing at 33rd Street on the West Side Highway. It is very loud. This is a almost an 8-lane boulevard. I know they call it the West Side Highway because it used to be an elevated highway, but now it's more of this median lined boulevard, which is really nice. And then on the right we have the rail yard. And yeah, so this area, now that I'm realizing, is more than a rail yard, because on the other side of this rail yard there's a bus yard, and then on this left side it's a traditional, you know, park and ride. And it's pretty interesting how the High Line kind of swoops down over here. So this entire area will get renovated. But yeah, we can get another glimpse. Again, on your right, all the way on the right over there is 15 Hudson yards. Behind that is 10. Behind this, I know it's obstructed, but the building behind this main one here, the one in the back, that's the one with the observatory, the edge. That's 30 Hudson yards. The one in front of it is 35 Hudson yards. This one right here, 55 Hudson yards. And then you have the spire over there. Let's see if we can get a better shot. Right there. And so if you saw from the renderings of the spire, you know, they definitely over-exaggerated the greenery and all that were going to be there, and in these sort of spiraled staircase that surrounding the building. And then in real life, it's just these tiny trees that you could barely even notice. But I think that's the case with all renderings. So I'm standing in this courtyard between 1 and 2 Manhattan West, and we can get a really nice glimpse of 30 Hudson yards with the edge observatory, and you can even see the see-through portion at the bottom. Okay, so I'm standing at 33rd Street, and here in front of us is Hudson Park, and here's 55 Hudson yards. Pretty interesting. A little basic, but it does have some elements of design. Each window is pretty big. Very large pane. You can see an opening over there, another opening higher up over here, and then some openings up there. And then right next to it, you have 35 Hudson yards. This one is somewhat interesting because in the top, it kind of portions out into these separate pieces and angles, and then it tapers a little bit as we get to the top. Okay, and over there, facing sort of southwest, we have 15 Hudson yards. This one, in my opinion, is probably the best looking one. Very interesting. It rounds off in these 4 separate sections up top. Very, very interesting. Here's another shot of 10 Hudson yards. Somewhat interesting, very big, but it does taper up to the top, but you can see how fat that bottom is, and the way it's sort of like a building within a building there. And then here we have 30 Hudson yards. This is the one with the edge. And then right next to that we have 50 Hudson yards. and then 66 Hudson Boulevard. So not really a part of the Hudson Yards complex, but we'll include it. Here we have the vessel located somewhere, I guess you can call in the middle of the park. It looks like there are some people up there. Oh, so they might have opened it up again. That is I'm just finding out this today. I was just gonna prepare, a segment of me talking about what happened and how it closed to the public based off the unfortunate events that you guys could look up on your own. But it looks like you can get in. I think the tickets used to be free prior, and now they made them sellable. So maybe that's new. But yeah, here's the vessel, so you can go up it. So to conclude this video and give my overall thoughts, I definitely won't say no to more skyscrapers in Manhattan, of course, right? I'm very grateful that they're building these things. And if I had the option for them not to, of course, I would rather than build it. I might critique the location and the design of some of these buildings, but ultimately I'd rather have something than nothing. But as far as the design, they're pretty simple. A lot of them are squared, with the exception of 15. I think this is the best looking one here with the curved top. But as far as the other ones, again, they're pretty simple. I'm not a big fan of these, the two there. The 10 and 30 Hudson Yards. Not a big fan. But I think ultimately what's the saving grace of these buildings is just their scale. I mean, they're massive compared to these right next to it. These look tiny, but these in and of themselves are pretty massive. These apartment buildings here. And on the left over there, you can see all these smaller buildings. So they definitely have a footprint. As far as the location, if they build this area here where I'm standing, it'll fill in the area, because it kind of felt like a void. They filled in a void, but at the same time, there's really not much surrounding the building. So they kind of, these cluster of buildings here just sat in isolation, and it kind of seemed a little bit off. Normally, New York has most American cities, but particularly New York, has a pretty structured skyline. We have a cluster of buildings in the financial district, and in fact, if you draw out the skyline, it kind of peaks in the center, and then as you go north and south, the buildings descent in height, and it forms this very uniform structured skyline, which is very unique in America. I think a lot of cities around the world, they just build skyscrapers wherever, and so the skyline kind of looks messy. Midtown is a little bit less structured, but still, you still have this concentration of high-rise buildings, and then as you move away, the buildings become, their height diminishes, and so you have this sort of tight structure. And then you have this, which kind of broke that pattern. This just slammed, right in this area that technically was not supposed to be that zone for that high, because, and this is where I think we need to change things, Hell's Kitchen, which I believe is right in that general area here. And it's really the last part of New York, last part of Manhattan that I think needs to get developed. They need to, let go of the past and really just upgrade, because ultimately you have these historical preservationists that want to preserve the area, but ultimately a lot of these people also complain about the lack of housing, and yet you want to keep these 3-story sort of brownstone buildings in right in the center of Manhattan. I mean, Hell's Kitchen is a block or two away from Times Square. And it just felt very odd it just feels very odd when you're in that area, because you have all these high rises around you, and then all of a sudden you enter Hell's Kitchen, and you could mistake it for an area in Brooklyn or Queens, or really it's the only part of Manhattan that still has 2 or 3 story brownstones. Pretty much all of Manhattan now has much larger residential areas, and it's the only area that didn't get the approval and the zoning I think it desperately needs. So I think once Hell's Kitchen finally breaks free from the chains that it's in, and we get to see some development, some high rises in that area, especially being right next to Times Square. I mean, we could really see some impressive buildings over there. It could really fill up the skyline here, because yes, this sort of filled a void here, but then we have another void that now is even more apparent over there. So I think we're moving in the right direction. Again, as I said, I won't say no to any skyscraper being built, but as far as the location, if these to make these look better, I think there needs to be more activities surrounding it, because right now these kind of sort of still stand in isolation. But I understand that once the rest of the yard gets built and then Hell's Kitchen gets built, we should see some this area sort of look more complete, rather than it just looking like a construction. It's still under construction. It needs to feel more lively. And another thing I want to mention before I close this video is the Jacob Javits Center. So this area was pretty scary looking back in the day. You just had a bunch of these yards here, and a lot of criminal activity in this area, and it wasn't particularly clean. It still isn't that particularly clean. But I think the Jacob Javits Center being what it is, sort of New York City's convention center, and it housing and bringing in a lot of tourists and outsiders, sort of their first glimpse into Manhattan. It wasn't too great, but now that we have Hudson Yards, and then this area will get built up, I think it'll really create a nice impression for these tourists on New York City. So overall, again, I won't say no to any skyscraper. Give anything, just give us anything. But ultimately, we need to make sure our skyline looks clean and complete, rather than it just looking like a scattered mess. And I think once this area gets developed, things will start to look a little bit more structured. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching this. Sorry if it was a bit disorganized. This entire complex is very, very large. I'm walking from one corner to the other. It takes me several minutes. And I know I'm not reviewing a particular building per se, but I hope I kept this somewhat concise. And thanks for watching. So I'm going to try to do justice to the scale of this building, just to the spiral. Again, I'm at 1x and then 0.5x. I mean, standing next to this thing, it covers this entire block, and it just soars up. And it doesn't set back much. It's just massive. Absolutely a behemoth. Again, the camera does not do it justice, but this thing is absolutely massive.